格ダークイーネ様が力を与えてくださったっていうのに。
Powers that you're clearly using to help you hit that bullseye in spite of your awful form. We opened this week, interestingly enough, with a little fog from last week's episode where Prune revealed that she slept with Uta and her possessive friend wanted to get in on some of that action. And yeah, I know last week we said they were like real sisters, and that was because I got the bright idea to pre-script and record a lot of that stuff. But I've still not seen the episode and just based a lot of it off of episode summaries. And it was just going to be a pain to redo a lot of it, so we just kind of ran with it. So yeah, as usual, I'm just an idiot. Anyway, in spite of the living lump of fur pushing up against her and her alarm clock going off, Uta ignored both of them and just decided to sleep in on a school day. S-tier role model there. But yeah, Preen decided that she and Meroron should try to cheer Uta into waking up, and apparently the idea of cheering was a foreign concept to the little sister who did identify as little sister, which, judging by the preview from last week, I'm sure her learning this stuff will play a big role in this episode, right? Well, regardless, their cheers weren't all that effective, and what actually woke Uta up was... Okay, just want to check. This show was meant for little girls and not whatever audience was into Sanjay and Craig, right? At school, the Precure noticed that one of their classmates, Wakaba, as well as most of the female student body, were fawning over this senpai.
Go say hi to senpai. Oh, senpai, where are you? I'm coming for you, senpai.
But yeah, he was really good at sports, and as it just so happened, their school was going to have their annual festival for it. With that in mind, Uta and Nana's friend group decided to participate as a volleyball team with the goal to both make it to the top spot and to support Wakaba by putting her in a good position to confess to senpai. And if you think all of this is just a tad bit cliched, well, congratulations, you have a pulse. Though, kind of interestingly, and yes, I do mean just kind of, Uta was unfamiliar with the idea of falling in love. I mean, obviously she knew what it was, but she hadn't ever experienced it, and unlike her friends who were in the same boat, didn't seem to have any interest in it. Though maybe that was just the case IRL, because as we have seen, she was a Shojo manga fan, and she even broke out Emma's book from the first episode. Though strangely enough, looking back at the first episode, the book looked more like a Yuri manga, and yet here, it looked more like a straightforward heterosexual romance. I mean, of course, there's a lot of shoujo manga out there that have both kinds of ships, and unfortunately, they rarely ever actually go with the right ones. And unfortunately, it also seemed to be the case with this show, as they were still pushing this ship and all of its very questionable age gaps.
Kaito-san wa koi shita koto arimasu ka?
Naisho.
Anyway, back to the more cliched, but at least less wince-inducing romantic subplot. It was actually urgent that Wakaba confess to Senpai, as he was apparently transferring to another school soon. Of course, she didn't have the courage to confess and all that, but her friends were there to encourage her to confess her feelings. And yeah, I guess this is a wholesome enough scene, but it's just hard to get invested in these clearly one-off romantic subplots. Meanwhile, at the bar of villainy, the Choki gang were reflecting on their string of losses, especially after the queen gave them a major power-up in the form of their gacha crystals. In the end, Kai decided to give it a roll this week. Personally, I think Kashin Koji is a pretty mid-assassin, and I do want to save up for those summer servants. Also, we got a new eye catch this week that was apparently done by Yoko Furuya, a still fairly new but very talented up-and-coming animator who gave us some of the better sequences from Wonderful. She was definitely a step above the actual animation director of this episode. Okay, I know I keep bringing this up, but for God's sakes, Mitsuru Aoyama, please retire. I'm sorry, but I've just seen this old man's stuff so much over the years, both in this franchise and Ojamajo Doremi, and almost always, it just looks so awkward. Like, I get that he does most of this stuff by himself, and therefore his episodes are probably really cheap to produce, and it shows when he clearly cuts corners by either abusing the drag and drop, or not checking to see if anything looks just a little awkward. Like seriously, their waving is off-putting enough, but why do their free hands have to be frozen in those positions? Does this look natural to you in any way? TLDR, this dude really should have quit when he was 69, as at least then he could write that he ended on a nice note. And yeah, it is important to bring him up in this sort of episode, as unlike his last outing, which really didn't need that much good animation, here, not only do we get another subpar Monster of the Week fight, which is just kind of normal with his stuff, but this is also a sports festival episode. Thus, our heroines do have to move around more than usual during their everyday scenes. And of course, that stuff is a little much for an old guy who insists on doing all the stuff by himself, and thus we get all of the Aoyama-isms, including still frames that pretty much devolve into slideshows, and a lot of cheating, like having gravity be turned off at some points. I don't think we're at blue lock levels just yet, but we're dangerously close. Anyway, during the semi-final match, Uta was benched due to an injury, but of course she still tried to cheer her team on, even though she lacked Minamo's technique.
右手に2本、左手に2本で4本。
多くても1本ずつ。
Regardless, all of this good sportsmanship did start to win over Meroron, who, yeah, I also kind of forgot was in this episode, even though they should be giving this new character a little more focus in order to properly integrate her into this team. Anyway, as we said earlier, Cuddy volunteered to be the villain of the week, but again, kind of interestingly, he was showing more signs that he was being won over by the Kiakira law that the Precure were helping produce. Thus, I do think he's probably going to be dropped as an antagonist soon, which, yeah, considering how this whole gang has been underperforming this whole season, it might be a good idea to just do a complete overhaul of these villains, as any sense of menace has pretty much dried up by this point. Though before that, Wakaba was of course the victim of the week, resulting in a monster that was actually less terrifying than most sports team mascots. The Precure transformed, but their leader wasn't medically cleared.
手首大丈夫？うん、大丈夫。あ、やっぱり痛い。
Compared to everyone else's arm contortions in this episode, you should be fine. Though of course, since this episode was all about cheering and cliched romances, Prune cheered her on, and Uta was able to have a Deku moment where she realized, oh yeah, I could also kick rather than constantly breaking my arm. Meroron also joined in the cheers, which again, doesn't really feel all that earned when she's barely been in this episode at all, but yeah, after a subpar fight, they finished off the monster without any broken fists. And of course, they also got a MacGuffin for the week. Wrong season! And in spite of the fact that the school really should have been closed down for the day after a monster attack, the games proceeded, and eventually Wakaba's team won, and in spite of losing, Cuddy actually stuck around. Okay, that would be a good line if this actually is going to be this character's final episode as a full-on villain. With that, Wakaba worked up the courage to confess to Senpai, and yeah, I'll get the ice cream ready. But oh well, it's actually not a bad bittersweet note to end this episode on and why she's staring at her male classmate.
次の恋、もう見つかっちゃった？かも。
Yeah, this episode kind of sucked. Like, even putting aside my usual issues with Aoyama, even though this episode really highlighted them, it was also an incredibly bland outing with a plethora of cliches. Worst of all is that this is coming right after the intro of a new character who really should have got to a little more focus. While I'm not saying the show should pull an OG and have the new fairy of the season suddenly get the lion's share of focus, it's also just weird that Meroron was just kind of an afterthought here. As along with being a new character who should be integrated into the team a little more, it just feels off to suddenly have her be important during the climax of the fight of this week. If they want to do that, then there should have been at least a few more scenes with her learning from Prune about the importance of cheering people on. It would hammer in the moral of the episode, and also give us more interactions between these fairies with the sister-esque bond. But no, instead, a lot of the focus went to one of the most cookie-cutter shoujo manga romances, which was only exacerbated when Uta broke out her manga. Really, about the only relatively interesting part of this episode was hinting at Cuddy Queen the Choki gang if he hasn't already. A change of the guard with these villains who have kind of turned into jokes would be great, even though yeah, it does highlight how underwhelming they've been throughout the season. Still, overall, this is just not a good episode. From subpar animation to cliche plots, I think I'd much rather just go watch actual volleyball. Like seriously, our state actually has a really good college volleyball team. Thank you for watching, and if you want to play some sports, well, you could always just watch some of our videos because it's quite the trial to get through them. As always, we've got a lot of stuff coming out to start the new week that we do hope that you're entertained by. Look forward to Print Session tomorrow. Until then though, for now my friends, and y'all hear something? Oh crap.